Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from ItalianGenealogy.blog, and I'm here today with Sharon Carmack. Sharon's written several books on Italian ancestry and researching ancestors in general. So welcome, Sharon, and how's everything where you are?
Thank you, Bob, and welcome to you to come to Utah, where we're locked down with everybody else.
Yeah, we're locked down here big time. My first question for you today is, have you done your own DNA test? And if so, how has that helped you with your research?
Well, that will be a very short answer. No, I have not done my DNA.
Really, is that because you're just not interested, or because you're security concerns, or?
It's because I'm an only child, and I would prefer not to find out that my father had affairs with other women, and I have siblings.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because I have a friend who actually found that out, and a cousin who actually found that out. And
I know.
The interesting story of my friend is he actually met his half brother, who was older, and his father made a woman pregnant before he actually met his mother. So he had no clue.
Yeah.
My cousin, on the other hand, I shared my DNA with a company, and I came up with a match for a second cousin. And I'm like, gee, I thought I knew all my second cousins, but this name doesn't ring a bell. And I contacted her, and we couldn't put it together. And I said, well, if you do Ancestry one day, we'll figure it out. And it turned out that my first cousin had an affair while he was married. And, I guess they're both cousins, right? I asked my cousin that I know, and I said, did you get a match with her? Because she's on Ancestry too. And she said, I did. And she said the only thing that she remembers, she was a little girl, and she says, I remember my mother crying in the bedroom for about 2 weeks. But that's all I knew until we made this connection. Can you talk a little bit about your own family research and what you found?
Do you want to know specifically about my Italian family, or
whatever you like, really?
Oh.
I mean, it's the podcast is geared towards Italian, but anything that's interesting, I think everybody likes to hear. So.
Well, when I started doing my family history research, I worked on my mother's line that goes back to Jamestown. One of her lines goes back to Jamestown. And a lot had been already written and documented, and I thought, well, this isn't fun. So then I went to work on my Italian side, where nothing had been done. And then genealogy became more fun for me, because I could do original research and find the records that no one else had found before. And it was quite exciting, especially with my great-grandfather, Albino DeBartolo, who went back and forth to Italy at least 2 times. This was before I knew about migrant workers. And what he was doing is he was coming to America, making money, going back to Italy for a while, then coming back to America, making some more money, and then going back and bringing his family over. And later, when I studied the social history, I found out that was quite common. And that's when I really got interested in family history, is learning the social history, the typical patterns, the typical immigrant experiences, knowing they came through Ellis Island and what that was like. And that's what really got me hooked.
So that's interesting that he was going back and forth. What year was that?
I think he first came, if memory serves, in 1900, but it might have been 1905. But it was short visits. He'd come here and he'd be here like 9 months. He was a seasonal worker, and then would go back to Italy for a few months and then come back to America.
And that's really interesting, because I'd never heard that before.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of research. I knew that happened a lot between Italy and England in I guess the mid to late 1800s, but I didn't realize that a lot of people were coming back and forth from them. Both my grandparents, all my grandparents came. They came and stayed. They came around 1914, 1915. So what did he do that he was coming back and forth?
Well, I don't know because I don't really have the doc. All it would say is laborer on the passenger list, so I don't really know exactly what he did. Once he finally settled here, he ran a little mom and pop grocery store, and then moved to San Francisco and did that there. And then my other great-grandfather also ran, it wasn't really as much a grocery store as it was a deli and a pizza parlor and a cafe and an inn. They took in boarders and that sort of thing. So I believe Albino might have been working on the railroad initially, and that's why he was coming. That's what the family story.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah, everybody has a different story. I know my mother's family came because my grandfather had served in the war in Libya, I guess around 1911 or something like that. And then World War I was breaking out. And I just recently learned this, that my grandmother said, "You're not going to war again, we're going to America." And my father's family, I still don't really know why they came, and I'm sure I'll never find out. The only thing I know is that my grandmother had one aunt here. That's the only family that she ever had here, and to this day, pretty much just the people from that line that came. But her family was nobility, so it was really strange to try and figure out why she came, and that's the only reason I could think that she came was because her aunt was here and must have said life is good here in America
Sure.
in 1915.
Well, and that's the other interesting thing about Italian immigrants in particular is they followed a pattern called chain migration. And for one of my lines, I've been able to trace the chain through the passenger list. So this person came at this time, and the passenger list says who they were going to join, and then I look up their passenger list, and it says who they were going to join in America, and I look up their list. And so I can go back, I think about 5 or 6 steps following the chain of migration.
Oh, well, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, but it has to be the later passenger list. The earlier ones don't tell you that. The after 1906, I believe, is when they started recording that.
Yeah, and there is a little bit of information on my grandmother. Now, my grandfather, I can't find him at all coming over. So I don't know if he snuck in or how he got here.
He swam.
And the same thing with my my mother's parents. I don't find their records, so I'm just guessing that they got lost or they still haven't been filmed or whatever the case may be.
Sure, or their names were misread in the index, they couldn't read them, or if the passenger list got wet for whatever reason, it blotted out the names. There could be a lot of reasons.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure there are. Being the author of so many books on genealogy and other guides and how to research, what would you suggest to somebody who's thinking about it but never really started or started and gave up?
Well, that's an interesting question because back in the day when I started, it was totally different than it is now. Now I would recommend either joining something like Ancestry.com, or if you have access to a public library or a family search center library that has Ancestry.com for free, I would suggest getting on there and doing nothing. I would suggest going on there and looking for the articles, the how-to articles, how to get started. I think a big mistake a lot of people make is they're so excited to get to the records, they're so excited to trace their ancestry, and they should be, but they don't know what they're doing. And so if you go to Ancestry, they have a tab for, I forget what it's called, I can look it up real quick, but they have a tab for education or learning or something like that. But they usually have articles on how to get started. And that's what you want. Visit Ancestry Academy, they have classes, or on Family Search, the Family Search Wiki, which you can just Google that. That has articles for different states, different ethnic groups, whatever. learn a little bit about what you want to do before you do it. And your research will be much more successful than just going at it in the dark.
Yeah, and I kind of went at it in the dark for the most part. What really got me started was we had, or have, my great-grandfather's, what I call calling card. Basically, a business card, but it's about the size of an index card almost, that has his name on it and the family crest and all of that. And I've always had that. My mom had it in the the family album with all the photos, and I always used to ask her about it. And the story was, well, he was a count. Actually, he wasn't, but he was from the family. So that's what kind of got me started. And I figured I was going to find him real easy. I Googled his name, and I got an angel fire listing of this family, Cracciolo, from Naples. And I said, well, that's strange. I never heard that name before. But I found him married to an Amelia, and that made sense because his name was Nicola, my father was Nicholas, being the second son, and my first aunt was Amelia. So it all kind of fell into place. The marriage date made sense and all of that. So I called my cousin who lived with my grandmother, and I said, "You ever hear that name, Caracciolo?" And she goes, "Yes, that Nanny's mom's name." So that kind of put it all together. And then I just found amazing and incredible things with that family. And we were actually supposed to be there a week from tomorrow to meet third and fourth cousins that I never knew existed up until about 2 years ago.
Oh, that's too bad.
I'm really bummed about that.
Yeah, hopefully there'll be another chance.
Well, we're gonna go try for October now. And what was really neat about it is that I found a person who she calls it Italy rooting, and what she does, it's not a tour. She's part genealogist and part researcher, and actually brings you back in time, 100 years or something like that.
Oh, nice.
So she had a lot of surprises in store. So we'll have to wait another 5 or 6 months now before we go back, and we're gonna have a lunch with the cousins and all of that.
Yeah.
So I know you've written many books about researching and documenting family and how to organize, and certainly when I do the posting, I'm going to put them all out there. But how do your books help people aside from looking at that initial ancestry stuff?
Right. Well, first of all, I want to tell listeners, if a lot of my books are out of print, there's still good information in them, but a lot are out of print. If you go and look for a used book, please do not pay $100 for one of my books. If you can't find a reasonably priced copy that you want to buy, go to your local library, or if they don't have it, request it on interlibrary loan, okay? I don't want anybody paying hundreds of dollars for one of my books. I wouldn't pay that. But anyway.
I think I paid $6 for the one that I bought. So.
Good. Well, I have a variety of books out. The ones that are still in print deal with writing your family history. You Can Write Your Family History is still in print, and Tell It Short, Writing Your Family History in Brief is in print. And that's mostly what I focus on now. My clients hire me either to write their family histories or to mentor them and help them write their family histories, or I'm editing their family histories. Because as I mentioned before, what brought genealogy to life for me was the social history and learning what the typical experience was. And so when I wrote my own family histories, Italians in Transition is one, and for my Irish side, My Wild Irish Rose, I wanted to put my family into a historical context. I didn't want just names, dates, and places. I wanted people to know what it was like to go through Ellis Island, what it was like to be an immigrant in a strange land where you knew no one, you didn't speak the language or anything. And so my main emphasis now is on writing family history, but I have plenty of other books that help with research and that sort of thing. They're outdated because they were written well before the internet, well before a lot of things came online. That was just when they were starting to come online. So even though how we access the records is different now than it was, how we use the records, how we analyze the records is still the same.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. And I'm glad that we connected now, because I'm attempting to write a family history for many of the Italian families involved, specifically some of the nobility and stuff, and I haven't a clue. So I was gonna.
I have a book for that.
Yes, I know, and I'm gonna get that. But I also need a proofreader and somebody to make sense of it. So and I started it, and I've done pretty well, but I'm not a writer. And what I was going to do now, because it was so close, I was going to wait until, we came back from Italy and got more of this information. So I'm going to have to park it again for another little bit till the end of the year. But I started it trying to intertwine the DNA and the family and all of that. And then when I went back and looked at it, picked it up again about a month ago, I said, it's too convoluted like this. So I think I'm just going to focus about the family history, is what I learned about my mom's family and interviews with my cousins and things like that. And then come back to being there and meeting the cousins, and recently meeting a cousin that her grandmother lived 5 blocks away from me in Flushing, Queens. The families were so intertwined because she descends from my grandmother's aunt, and the families were so close-knit in the 30s and 40s, and I never knew any of this.
Right.
And when we connected through Ancestry, she actually came last year, and she came with her cousin, he's my cousin too, I guess. But his mom, my first cousin and his mom were best friends. I never knew this. And his mom used to work for my grandfather and his brother in an embroidery shop in New York City. And she brought me and my cousin Paul and my sister beads from my grandfather's shop. So, without the internet, this never would have happened.
True, absolutely.
And we were laughing because we probably passed each other on the street countless times and never even knew who we were.
Right.
And I said to her, I said, when I moved into the apartment that my cousin had vacated, I kind of recall now my father saying, Aunt Beatrice lives there. And you know how everybody in Italian family, everybody's an aunt and a cousin.
Sure.
And I must have said to myself, being 21 years old, I was like, yeah, okay, Aunt Beatrice lives there. Who cares?
That's right.
So the other fascinating thing, and I don't know if you tie it together or not, but I know that you have a Facebook group about spiritualist ancestors, and you have a website addressing that. So do you tie those two things together, the ancestry and spiritual roots, somehow?
Well, yes and no. I'm a spiritualist medium, and I am working on a book which will be out this fall called In Search of Maria B. Hayden, the American medium who brought spiritualism to the UK. It's a biography of this woman who very little had been known about her. What had been known about her was just her brief time in England when she was doing seances and converting all the royalty and nobility and everything else. So in my research, I feel like Maria B. Hayden has been guiding me. She was born in 1824 and died in 1883. And so I do feel she was guiding me, and I think a lot of genealogists feel that their ancestors guide them. In fact, a colleague of mine and friend, Hank Jones, wrote 2 books called Psychic Roots and Psychic Roots 2. And it was all about serendipity and feelings we get about how our ancestors want us to find, well, most of them want us to find them, and how they help us and how they lead us to things we might not have found on our own. And I think that's true for Maria B. Hayden. Now, I have not done much research on my own families since I became a medium 5 years ago, so I can't really say that. However, I've heard from a lot of them, sitting in development circles and being with other mediums and teaching mediumship. My students have brought through some of my ancestors and relatives. So there is a connection, just not exactly what you might think.
And I think that makes sense. A funny story about my research is I had a couple of roadblocks. One was with the Piramalo family, where I kind of pretty much knew based on my own research, but I don't like saying I know who this is and I know that this person's an ancestor unless I'm absolutely positively sure. And I know a lot of people don't care about that, but I do.
I do
because
too.
Because what's the point if you can't prove it?
Right.
And so I did hire somebody in Naples to help me with that. And he came back and he validated all my thoughts on the Piramalo family and the Cracciolo family and found records that I couldn't find. And then as a result of that, I found other records. So that all kind of made sense. I couldn't find anything on the Sorrentino family. My oldest uncle's name was Achille. So I knew pretty much my grandfather had to be Achille. And my living relatives, the older relatives, my grandfather's brother's family, they were all giving me a name like Matteo. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. There's nobody's named Matteo. Can't be. So I had it out there with this researcher in Italy for about a year, and nothing. He didn't come back to me. In fact, I had, paid him the extra money, and I was just about to ask him for the money back. And my cousin Louise, who was the person that I validated the Cracciolo name with it, she passed away. 2 days later, I got all the Sorrentino records. And I said to my wife, I said, coincidence? I don't know. I said, but it is very, very strange that all of this showed up on my doorstep 2 days later.
Yep. Well, see, I don't believe in coincidence, so I would say something very interesting was going on.
Yeah, it was just very strange, and I've had a couple other experiences, not necessarily with genealogy, and I know a lot of people don't believe in things, and I'm skeptical myself sometimes.
Sure, so am I.
But there's been things that happened to myself and my wife that you just have to say whom, and I think one of the most interesting ones was 2 things that happened right around when my wife's mom passed away. The first one being is my wife always used to tell her mom, give me a sign. If something ever happens to you, give me a sign. And her mom had a stroke. She was in the hospital. And her mom had a twin sister that passed away when she was 14. And my wife's mom, she passed away. We were both in New York City. We had to come to New Jersey to go to the hospital and all of that. And we came back from the hospital. My wife went into the bathroom, and we had a light bar with 3 lights on it. She turned on the lights, and the 2 end light bulbs went off at the same time. And I've heard other people say they've had things like that happen to them. And again, you could explain it by being a coincidence, but it just doesn't seem like it was a coincidence.
And after a while, how many coincidences can there possibly be? And we also have to remember that the law of physics says everything is made up of energy, and energy cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed. So if we're made up of energy, after the physical body dies, the consciousness, the spirit, the soul, the essence of the person, whatever you want to call it, has to go somewhere. It can't be destroyed, so where does it go? Some people believe it lives on, as I do, and some people believe it's just absorbed into the universe. I can give evidence that the soul, the consciousness lives on. I don't believe anybody can give evidence that it gets absorbed into the universe.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And the other thing that happened right around the same time, we were moving into a new house, and we did, and there were some strange things that would happen now and again, and yeah, we just kind of wrote it off. And we were there maybe about a year or so, and my father-in-law, who both my wife and I truly believe that he could see things. I picked up my wife went to see him. He was in Queens, and we lived in New Jersey. She went to see him. I picked her up at the train station. She said, and normally we would get Chinese takeout and come home. And she said, I have to tell you something, but I can't tell you at home. We have to go someplace. We have to go eat someplace. So I said, I can't tell you at home. I have to tell you someplace else. So we go, and she said, my father wanted to know why we bought such a big house. Was one of the rooms for the ghost? So she said, what are you talking about? And he said, there was a little old man in the room that I sleep in. He would come and visit once in a while. And he was wearing short pants and a beige baseball hat. And he was walking back and forth in front of the window. So I said, who knows? That we knew that the person we bought the house from, that she had an elderly mother and father. And so the next day, I saw the next door neighbor, and I asked her, I said, Virginia, I have to ask you something. I said, was Rose's father a little old man, and would he wear a beige baseball hat and walk back in front in one of the bedrooms? And she said, which room? And I said, the little room at the top of the stairs? She says, yeah. I said, that room. She turned white and said, how did you know that? And I said, well, my father-in-law said he saw him. And she said, that was Rose's sewing room, and her father would pace back and forth, waiting for her to come home from work.
That's wonderful. I love that story.
Yeah, it was great. And so there were always little things that happened.
Sure.
And nothing scary, though.
Oh, no. Spirit
And
world
then,
isn't trying to scare us. They're only trying to get our attention.
Yeah, and after maybe 5 or 6 years, we learned that Rose's mom passed away, and everything stopped.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, we just figured, well, maybe he was just waiting for her to come, and once she came, that was it. He was done.
That makes sense.
But it's very difficult to dismiss some of these things. And when I tell people these stories, I know I could tell you because you'll understand. But you tell other people, and they look at you like,
I know.
Okay.
I know. I have to be careful who I tell I'm a medium.
I just think it's fascinating. I think there's so much stuff that we don't know about. Like my wife and I always joke about aliens because she thinks I'm nuts. And I said, I'm not saying that they're here. I'm not saying that they came. All I'm saying is that it's possible.
That's right. You have to have an open. We don't know. You have to have an open mind.
I said, when you watch some of these things, it's very, very difficult to just say, well, it was nature, or
yes, I agree.
These people somehow had tools that could do these precision cuts that we can't make today, and things like that. And it's very, very, very strange to me. How would you explain to somebody that has that urge like we do, that 90% of the other people don't have? Why would you think? I think I know why I have it, but why would you think that some of us just have that reason to try and find out about our past or our ancestors?
Well, I can't say obviously with certainty, but I do feel that there's usually just at least one. You're lucky if you find more than one person in the family who's really drawn to this. And my personal belief after becoming a medium is, just as some people can see spirit or some people can communicate with spirit, those ancestors are calling to a particular individual in that family, and we get it. And maybe not on a conscious level do we hear them or see them or are aware of them, but I feel like they're the ones who are saying, oh, take a look at this. You might be interested in that. And that gets us hooked. Now, before I became a medium, I would have said, it's just somebody who's the crazy one in the family who likes to look up dead people. So, it's hard to say what nudges them. Like I said, as a medium, I feel the spirit world is the one who nudges us now.
Yeah, and it's even, we have been to Italy once, like 25 years ago. And I know I've talked to some people who just said, yeah, it was a nice trip. And then I talked to other people and they say, I felt like I belonged there. And that's the way I felt when I was there. My wife was like, she says, you love this. And I said, yeah, I feel like I'm, with my people.
Right. Well, and that's another interesting story is one of my DeBartolo cousins, or DeBartolo, however you want to say it, she's my fourth cousin. And several years ago, I get this email from this lady. She's read my book, Italians in Transition, which is her family as well. And she contacts me, and she's so excited. And she's planning a trip to Terlizzi, Italy, which is where our families are from. And could I, help her along? And sure, I did. And sent her maps and told her what I knew and who to visit there and everything else. And then she comes home and she writes this article or this essay and sends it to me. And it was a few days before I got around to reading it. And she's talking about all the signs and symbols that she saw on her trip and how her Italian grandmother had the sixth sense or the ability to communicate with those who'd passed and whatever. And I thought, wait a minute, this is too coincidental that this woman, who I'm just learning is my fourth cousin, found me out of the blue, and we're both on the same journey to become mediums. And it's like, who coordinated that? I mean, that had to have been coordinated. That was not a coincidence. And so we laugh about it. We really think it was her Italian grandmother, who is related a couple generations away from mine, but we really feel like it was a coordinated effort that her deceased grandmother, put into motion, and so all the pieces fell into place, and we've become very good friends since then.
Wow, that is funny.
Yeah.
And just for, I don't know a lot about mediums and what they do. I do know that my sister, she had a son who passed away when he was 10, and she went to a few people and, a couple of famous ones. But what exactly, does a medium do in helping people either get comfort or to find something out they didn't know or whatever?
Right. Well, a good medium will give you, when she or he connects with a loved one on the other side, will give you evidence of that person that the medium had absolutely no way of knowing. And it might be cause of death, it might be the work they did, it might be their hobbies, it might be friendships. It could be any number of things that the medium obviously has absolutely no way of knowing. The only way she would know it is if she's talking to the deceased. And typically in a reading, that's what the medium does first. She establishes the evidence so that you say, yes, that is my grandfather or my mother or whoever it is. There's little doubt in your mind that that person is there in spirit. And then typically in a reading, the spirit person will want to give a message to the person, the sitter or the recipient, or they might want to offer apologies. They might feel remorse for things that they did while here in the physical world and have since learned when they do their life review in the spirit world. And so they will want to try to make amends, because a mediumship reading is about helping the bereaved, but it's also about helping the living and the deceased heal relationships and making sure those relationships are on a good track in healing and getting back on track. So that's a typical private sitting. I also do public demonstrations, and in a public demonstration, I have an audience full of people, and I'm connecting with the spirit world and finding who the recipient is in the audience. Those readings are usually much shorter, about 7 minutes or so. But again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm bringing through evidence of this person who I have absolute no knowledge of, and then bringing through usually a message of healing.
Yeah, and my sister, like I said, she went to several, and the one that really struck me when she recounted the story was, which I found fascinating, because the other ones they were more famous, and I don't know, it was could have been, but maybe
Right.
not so sure. But this other one, she said to my sister, I see your son, and he's with a man or a young man, and but I don't understand, because he's telling me to tell you that he's with Aunt. He keeps saying, I'm with Aunt. He said, but there's no woman there. There's only this young man. And I don't understand it. And my sister couldn't figure it out. And then finally she said, do you know a young man who died tragically, maybe by a gun? And then it struck my sister that they had acquaintances in Staten Island that they would see maybe once or twice a year. And Michael was probably 8 or 9, and this fellow is Italian. His name was Anthony, but he didn't go by Tony. He went by Ant. Everybody called him Ant. And these two had this symbiotic relationship. And whenever they saw each other, they just gravitated towards each other. And Michael passed away when he was 10, and I think this guy maybe a year or so later. And that to me was, this person actually saw him, and he recounted this story and was telling my sister, I'm with somebody safe. I'm with somebody that I know.
And that's very common. Children are never alone in the spirit world. When a child comes through and I'm aware of a child, the first thing I do is I look for what adult is with them, because they're never alone in the spirit world.
Really? Well, that's fascinating. And why is that?
Because they're just not. Because when children cross over into the spirit world, there's always if there is a relative already in the spirit world, they become like their guardians, and they look after them and they help them learn and grow. And so it's often a grandparent, but it can be an aunt or an uncle or someone else who had a connection either with the parent of the child or the child themselves.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah. And the only thing I ever had personally with that was my best friend got killed in a car accident when he was 20. And I was very distraught. I was like, really, I still get upset when I talk about it, because we were such close friends. And I just, for days, I couldn't get on. And one night I woke up and I looked at the edge of the bed, and he was there. And it was your typical vision of what, you see in the movies, of this outline of him at the foot of the bed, kind of just floating. And he didn't say anything, but like he didn't talk, but he gave me a message. I'm okay. You have to stop. I'm okay. And I had the most peaceful feeling I've ever had in my life. I never had that much of a peaceful feeling before.
That's wonderful. And that they do that. When they cross over into spirit world, they keep an eye on us. They watch us. They watch over us. And they know if we're grieving and not letting go of their passing or obsessing about it or whatever. And so a lot of times they're just coming through to say, I'm okay. And especially if it were a particularly tragic or difficult passing, they want, a lot of times when I've communicated with spirit people who've had difficult deaths, physical deaths, they want the person to know that their soul was already out of the body. It was just the body shutting down, and they did not feel the pain. It's more traumatic for us than it is for them. And I've also communicated with a lot of suicide victims, and typically they're very remorseful. Once they get to the other side and they understand the magnitude of what they've done, they're very remorseful that they took their own lives, because it not only took their life, but it took away the life of all the people who loved them. And that's if they thought their burden in the physical world was difficult, they're going to find out when they get to the spirit world that it's even more of a burden to carry that responsibility. And that's the thing. With suicide, because life continues on, all you're shedding is the physical body. You take all your problems, you take all your joys, all your sorrows with you to the next world. So suicide isn't solving anything. It's adding a burden. And unfortunately, that's what it takes for some of them to realize that that was not the thing to do. It would have been better to figure out and solve the problems here.
Well, they always say that it's the coward's way out, right? I mean, hard to say because I've never really, thought of it in that way. But let me ask you one more question.
Okay.
Why do some people? Because I know people say, "Gee, I wish somebody would contact me. I wish my father or my brother or myself, whatever." Why is it that some people may have somebody contact them with or without a medium, and some people don't? Is it because they're close to it, they don't really believe? I mean, what's your thought on that?
Well, there could be a number of reasons. I mean, if the person still left in the physical world doesn't believe, they're not going to be open to any kind of communication. But we also have to remember that, as I said, we take all of our problems and issues with us when we go to the spirit world. If we haven't resolved them before we left, and who of us has resolved every single issue and every single relationship, that's what we work on the other side. The spirit world has doctors and therapists. Those who are doctors here who pass into the spirit world still practice over there. Those who are therapists still practice over there. And there are a lot of souls that still need help. Of the suicide victims I've talked to, some of them, I can see them in the spirit world, but they keep their back to me because they're ashamed, they're embarrassed. They're not ready to face the loved one. They're there, and I can tell the recipient they're there, but they're not yet ready to face what they've done, or they're not ready to face you because they feel like they won't be forgiven or they aren't forgiven. And so there's a lot of healing that takes place on the other side. So communication, that's why we say we can't conjure the dead or we can't call up somebody at will. They have to be willing to communicate, and the person receiving the communication has to be willing to receive it.
Wow, that's fascinating. Uh, it really is I could go on for hours.
Well, yeah.
I'm sure you could too.
It
It's
is
just,
fascinating.
well, being raised a Catholic and all of that,
So was I.
you're taught to, all these mysteries and all of these things, and a lot of this is counter to what Catholics believe. And
Actually, it's not. Actually, it's not. Catholics talk to the dead. You're allowed to light candles for the dead. You're allowed to talk
That's
to
true.
the saints.
Yeah.
You're allowed to talk to the angels. What they don't like is that there's a two-way communication. You can
I
still
see.
talk to them. They just don't want you having a two-way communication.
That's too funny. Well, I always tell my wife one of my great grandfathers, well, actually two. There's two. Two of them were popes.
Oh.
And I have several saints going back through that Caracciolo line. But I always tell my wife, I said, well, if I run into Pope Paul III on the other side, I don't know if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing.
That's right.
He was making his nephews and his sons cardinals when they were like 18 years old and things like that. So who knows? But anyway, this has been fascinating, without a doubt. I really, really appreciate the time and the chat, and
You're so welcome.
you being open about this, because I think it's a fascinating subject. And I think outside of the genealogy, I think a lot of people are going to be interested in hearing that, whether they believe or don't believe. I myself, based on my own experiences, I know there's something out there that I don't understand. And I know that
Right.
In certain ways, especially a couple of things that happened with genealogy, to your point, that maybe there was a little nudge someplace
There
to
you
get me
go.
the information I need. So. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook in the Italian Genealogy group or at www.italiangenealogy.blog.